This is the King Country Rural Roundabout, brought to you in association with the Ruapehu Rural Support Trust. Phone 0800 787 254. And The Trunk, 88 FM, homegrown right here in Taumarunui.
On the show this week, I'll be talking to Fiona Windel. Fiona is the head of nutrition at Beef and Lamb New Zealand Incorporated. I'll also be speaking to Nick Collins. Nick is an organic dairy farmer at Piu Piu. Geoff Burton, who is a farm consultant and sheep farmer, and finally, Geoff Hall, who is a sheep and beef farmer near Ohura. It's my pleasure to welcome Fiona Windel, Head of Nutrition at Beef and Lamb New Zealand, to the show. Welcome.
Hi, Brian. Thank you.
Now, tell us a little bit about what a nutritionist does in the New Zealand red meat sector.
Well, sure. So Beef and Lamb New Zealand Incorporated is the domestic marketing arm of the sector, who I work for. They're an Auckland-based team led by our CEO, Rod Slater. He's a butcher by trade. And as an organisation, our role is to influence New Zealand's attitudes and behaviours when it comes to making food decisions. So whether that's in the retail setting or in a restaurant or online. And so I guess the role of the nutrition team, of which there's three of us, that there's two registered nutritionists and a dietitian, we work closely with our marketing team and we ensure that all our communication around the health benefits of red meat are backed by sound science and have input to our various campaigns, which often have a nutrition focus. And so part of that feeding into that work is, ensuring that people know about the functional benefits of eating red meat. But then on the flip side, we're also working closely when issues arise. So often there might be some misinformation or the latest report or research that might question the place of meat in the diet. So we work around the issues management side to react to misinformation as well. So on a day-to-day basis, we might be doing that, or also developing recipes and communicating, the benefits around getting in the kitchen and cooking from scratch, which a lot of people don't do anymore. And also working closely with health professionals. So those are the ones that are working at the coalface, influencing people's decisions when it comes to health. So equipping those people to provide the latest science on the role of meat in the diet.
Okay, if I can just go back a little bit there we talk about restaurants, or you talk about restaurants and so forth. What amount of work is done around restaurants, educating them into, their nutrition?
So in terms of the role of the restaurant serving food and serving, quality beef and lamb and really raising the bar of excellence in our restaurants, we have our Excellence Awards scheme where restaurants who serve beef and lamb are audited and checked from people who, food connoisseurs. And then we have ambassador chefs as well who help profile our product at the high level. And I guess when it comes to nutrition and chefs, they often don't go hand in hand.
No.
Chefs often use, rich ingredients. But of course, we know when we go to a restaurant, it is a treat, and that's not the sort of food that we eat day in, day out. But yeah, certainly I think there's a real opportunity, and we've often done it at the A&P shows and things, when you have a duo act between a chef and, say, a nutritionist, or a chef and a butcher, and, having those dual roles where we can talk about the food but from different angles and having fun in the kitchen while, having the health aspect as well, but we don't want to take the fun out of it. So it's really that, a good mix of both.
And I understand some pretty important, pretty famous chefs have been involved with beef and lamb over the years too.
Yeah, that's right. So across New Zealand, we've had, some of the prominent names. I mean, way back in the day, we had Peter Gordon, who of course went over to the UK. He's back in New Zealand now. Rex Morgan, who was, chef for Air New Zealand, is one of our platinum chefs as well. So it's those names that are well known amongst the hospitality sector and are really showcasing the best beef and lamb cuts, even if it's a primary cut or a secondary cut, and a lot of them do a combination of both in one dish. So those chefs do our product proud.
I'm a bit of a foodie, but I'm not that good. Primary and secondary cuts, what's the difference there?
So the primary cut is the more sort of traditional cuts that you'd be used to, say like a steak. And then the secondary cuts might be like a lamb neck or osso bucco, so the ones that usually take a little bit longer to cook. So when you break down that primary cut a bit further and go further into the carcass, those ones that are not as traditional, that it's actually something that we're going to focus on a bit more next month, because we're going to do a nose to tail focus where we're encouraging people to try different cuts, including offal, which might not be a normal product for people, but just getting people thinking about diversifying their palate when it comes to meat, because we all have our favourites and our tried and true, but there's so much more to the animal that we're going to encourage people to try.
I know the minute you mention offal, the first thing that comes to mind is lamb's fry and bacon.
Yeah, yep. That's one that I think we promote quite a little bit already. So through our communication with health professionals, as I mentioned, and recipes for babies. So when they start eating solids, around about 6 months, liver is a food that we encourage as iron rich, just a little bit, because you don't need too much for babies. But in fact, too much it would be dangerous. Yeah, and having that little lamb's fry or lamb's liver is quite a common cut that you can introduce quite early and really get that really top nutrition when they need it, through that brain development stage.
Right, and so it's important in their development and their progress, as well as it is for people sort of, some of us that are retired or whatever. We need to keep those iron levels up and things like that to stop all sorts of things. So it's important, again, to balance it out, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think when it comes to including meat in the diet, there's obviously been a bit of narrative, particularly before COVID-19 hit us, that people were sort of questioning the role of meat in the diet and questioning the role of agriculture on our environment. And I think that sort of narrative went a little bit too far, that suggested, plant-based eating meant that animal foods didn't have a role in our diet. Well, that's sort of gone a bit too far, because we know that a mixture of all foods will provide you with that nutritionally adequate diet that we as nutritionists would encourage, a good mixture and variety of all foods.
Yeah, I see that there's been a fair bit of noise around reducing meat consumption. And what sort of trends have you observed with eating patterns of New Zealanders, sort of particularly around red meat?
Well, as I mentioned, you'd think from the narrative that we would you hear, that you'd think a lot of people have reduced their red meat intake significantly, or perhaps stopped altogether. But for us to get a real sense of what New Zealanders are thinking and doing, we do turn to consumer insights, and we commission a research company to go and talk to consumers and get that real insight to separate that sort of hype from reality. And so what's reassuring, and only in the last couple of months we've done a last round of insights, so it was during May, during COVID, so it was interesting to sort of see what patterns were happening. But that red meat still remains staple in 9 out of 10 New Zealand households, so that's seen across New Zealand as a representative sample. But when you sort of dig deeper, the frequency and quantity may have reduced somewhat. So there's obviously more options in the protein category with, alternative proteins and a range of cuts. So people might not be eating it as often, but it's certainly not off the plate for a majority of New Zealanders. We have seen a slow increase in people that identify as vegetarian or flexitarian, someone that eats meat sometimes, but, too fussed if they went 1 week without it. So we are seeing a bit of a peak in that, particularly among our younger consumers, and you'd expect that because young people like to experiment with the latest dietary trends and things. So overall, it certainly still has a place on the plate, but obviously there's other options there that people are trying.
Because we're Kiwis, there's a thing, three veg or meat and 3 veg in the good old Sunday roast. Is that still fairly prevalent today?
Probably not in your younger families. So whilst many of us grew up with that and have carried through that tradition through to your own family, for those of us that have got young children, when we don't ask specifically how people are cooking their product or what sort of meals they are, but we are noticing a shift away from roast, and unfortunately it all sort of comes down to that price. So we know that price can be a barrier for some families. So depending on what's on special at the time, people will look for a roast if it's on special. Yeah. But if there is a barrier that it's a bit cost prohibitive, people aren't probably having it week to week, just depending where their budget's going to stretch to. But with there's such a range of cuisines now that the meat and 3 veg may just look a little bit different. So rather than a slab of meat and some veg on the side, it might be a cuisine of Mexican with mince and mixed in with beans and veg, or a curry. So it's all sort of, obviously mixed in together with all these different tastes that people are enjoying. So it's good to see that people are willing to try these new cuisines, and that's what we're passionate about with our recipe development, is we try and cater to all tastes and moods depending on what people feel like that day of the week.
I think you've just nailed it in that respect, that there is so much variation, and people are starting to experiment, and I think a lot of the younger people are doing it, and it's flowing through to the oldies now, that hey, have a go at a lamb curry, have a go at this, try that. And it seems to be something that is starting to take off a bit, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly. And our insights tell us that regardless of age, people do see beef and lamb as certainly delicious, that it's versatile and it's nutritious and natural. So they are the sort of key aspects that we try to leverage from, regardless if it's a younger or older consumer. And I think with that price barrier, it's interesting that those that, we have our online platforms, social media, etc., that it tends to be older consumers that complain about the price because they remember it being cheaper. They've lived through a transition of the cost of food, whereas younger consumers see the value of it because they don't have anything to compare it to. And once people have when we do dinner diaries and people once they've eaten our product, they rank the value even higher. So you've gone through the experience and you can then see the value that what you've paid for it is worth it because it's such a tasty experience. So It's interesting to see that differentiation across younger and older people too.
Yeah, I want to touch on global trends. Where do we kind of stack up there?
Global trends. So our offshore brand, Taste Pure Nature, is our identity in terms of our New Zealand beef and lamb red meat story. And so last year that launched into California and more recently going into China. But from our overseas market team, they've done a lot of work to draw that brand awareness and draw that home. And the people they're targeting, particularly in California, that tend to lead in dietary trends is what they would call the conscious foodie or the conscious consumer. So those that are looking for and willing to pay for a product that they deem good for them and will make them feel and perform better. And obviously with beef and lamb being a nutritious option, you've then got the New Zealand story, which is it being grass-fed. And that grass-fed story, particularly when it comes to the health aspects that people associate it with being naturally raised, with good, really high animal welfare standards, they are the sort of the key drivers that are demanding that premium in these markets. And so we'll continue tracking both, American and those Chinese consumers. But I think that sustainability story will be the win for us overseas. Yeah,
and grass-fed, we're well known for it worldwide. We don't put our cattle and our lambs and whatnot into a paddock or into a shed and feed them grain. I mean, I guess it's a little bit of it, but the beauty is that our produce is grass-fed, isn't it?
Yeah. So in the main, so unless there's, things like droughts and so forth, pasture-raised. So depending on the time of year, they might be, might switch to some fodder beet or so forth. But but it is pasture raised, free roaming, which is, it's quite the opposite to the industrialised model that you'd see in the Northern Hemisphere. So that's a differentiation that we have. Obviously, there are other countries that do grass-fed, but so it's backing it with that New Zealand story. And, the strong connection that that many New Zealanders have with their food and the land. And I think that's the beautiful story that we need to really leverage and how that connection, particularly with, the Māori and their connection to whenua, is something I think we should be talking more about.
Now, what sort of is on the agenda for you in throughout this coming year?
So we've had to, the famous word of pivoting. We've had to pivot a little bit the last couple of months. So we had all ready to go above the line, top level nutrition campaign that was going to be launched in March. And obviously due to the circumstances, we decided to put that on hold and wait for, a more receptive audience.
Yeah.
So for now, we've decided to give back to the community and we are calling for nominations from Grassroots New Zealand, whether it's sports team or a school that's doing a bit of a fundraiser, and we're facilitating, some product to be made available for those communities. So that's what we're just doing at the moment. In July, I mentioned the Nose to Tail month. So that's where we're going to try and encourage people to, try something different and, maybe even consider the offal. I'd be interested if any of your listeners cook offal and if they've got some recipes worth sharing. I'd love to hear them. And then later in the year, come August, we facilitate a campaign, an iron awareness campaign, so dietary iron. Unfortunately, in New Zealand, in a land of plenty, we still have issues with our toddlers, our teenage girls and women aren't getting enough iron in the diet. And so we take that week as an opportunity to talk about the benefits of including red meat in the diet, whilst recognising some people may not eat red meat and that, there are other sources. So we always encompass all foods, but, red meat being one of those key foods, and really highlighting those prevalence rates. So 8 out of 10 toddlers don't get enough iron and about a third of teen girls. And that's really crucial time in these young people's lives where they need, optimum nutrition. And so we use that as a week to engage with media, engage with health professionals and consumers to think about what they're eating, and to tune into some of the signs and symptoms which often get ignored. So that's sort of the next 3 months. And then hopefully come September, October, we might be ready to launch that nutrition campaign again, depending how things travel with the pandemic.
Now, coming back to the community initiatives, how can people get in touch with you and become involved in, you talked about sports clubs and maybe, school fundraisers or whatever. How do they go about getting in touch?
So if people go to our website, which is www.beeflambnz.co.nz, and there'll be a tab there called Community Fund, and click on there and there'll just be a small form to fill in that will come to our office, and it will go into the pool for consideration for us to look at. And so at the moment we're just looking at sort of a $200 amount of meat that people can apply for, which then they can generate a fundraiser and raise money for clubs, because we know a lot of clubs will be feeling that pinch of a lack of funding at the moment. So hopefully it's a little bit will go, every little bit helps, and that's what we're hoping we can achieve at that grassroots level.
Oh, I think that's brilliant and a fantastic initiative as well. And it's odd that you say that, because we've taken on a little project which involves the food fairy. Now, the food fairy is going to come and cook a meal, and for some lucky person in the town in Tomaranui, and we're working away with that at the moment. So here's something that I think, could involve the food fairy, who I know will be listening. The thing about that is that, hey, here's a good opportunity. And it's also a good opportunity, again, as you say, there's nothing like a chop on the barbie, is there?
Oh, no, definitely not. And so, I'd encourage that food fairy to get in touch with us, and we might be able to help get some beef and lamb on a lucky person's plate. Whoever is lucky enough to receive it. I think it's a fantastic initiative. And look, I think that what you're doing is amazing, and it's a story in its own, and it works, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. And I think over the years, for our sector, and in terms of telling that story, it's been a real evolution. So I've been with the sector for over a decade now, and to think back of how we've, whilst we're an industry body, and how we've branded ourselves in the use of Olympian women, sports superstars with what we deemed called the Iron Maidens.
Yep.
Using them to front our product, and then we work closely with butchers and having those as ambassadors for the product. It's been a real journey, and coming to today, it's kind of really looking at, well, what next for us? And it's an exciting time for us to be in, because we know that food and food producers are probably much more appreciated than ever before. So it's really our time as part of the wider food sector to really shine and showcase what we do best.
Every cloud has a silver lining, and I think that what's come out of this whole COVID business is that a lot of men have started cooking, learning in some cases, but doing some amazing things. And I think, I say it's brilliant, because we're seeing a whole different side of guys, I reckon.
Yeah. It will be interesting, because I know surveys have been done asking how people's habits, what changed during lockdown, including eating and even exercise, and which of those habits will carry through, and stick. Because as you say, if people have got in the kitchen a little bit more and spending quality time with their family, I think people will be really questioning, how their lifestyles are balanced to keep those good habits going.
And a final word from you, Fiona.
Oh, look, I think I'd like to encourage people to just think about where their food's coming from, whether that's someone, a food that's coming from local New Zealand, and just to get a greater appreciation about our food supply and those producers that are working hard to get food on our plates. And if there is someone local that's producing it, you go out there and support them and buy their product.
You're listening to the King Country Rural Roundabout in association with the Ruapehu Rural Support Trust. Phone 0800 787 254. On the trunk, 88 FM, homegrown right here in Tomaranui.
And it's my pleasure to welcome Nick Collins to the show. Nick, how are you?
Very well, thanks, Brian.
Oh, good. Now, you and your wife Jo run an organic dairy farm near Piu. How did that come about, Nick?
We always had an interest in organics and farming in that fashion. I was brought up on a sheep farm.
Yep.
Jo was from town, and always had an interest in the environment. Both of us from an early age. So spent 7 years shearing here and overseas. How Jo and I met in the shearing industry. Yeah, and I was shearing in the States and had an accident over there, and I was just looking for a fill-in job till my knee healed up after that, and I ended up working for a guy in Oklahoma who'd gone shear milking.
Right.
And he said, come work for us for a while. So that was 29 years ago. I've been milking cows ever since then, through the contract milking, shear milking, and then farm ownership. And just along the way, we actually, the shear milking job we had here in Piu had a history of just RPR-based fertiliser and quite a strong farming history the farm we're on. Once we started putting on the potassic super and urea, we started to get all sorts of animal health issues coming through. So, we just sort of thought, possibly this organic farming could be worth a try when we bought our farm. And 6 months after taking over, Fonterra announced an incentive payment to encourage people onto the organic program. So that was sort of the catalyst to jump on board, and that was just over about 16 and a half years ago. We've been with on the organic program ever since.
So what are some of the challenges that were involved in converting the farm over, Nick?
The big one was just transitioning the soils. The farm had a history. It was actually a sheep farm converted to dairy 7 years prior to us taking over. There were some significant weed challenges, and it was just a case of understanding how to manage the soil and looking at weeds in a way that why is that weed growing? Weed will grow. It's more of a primary plant, so they sort of send a message as to what's happening in the soil. So it was getting an understanding around that, and just getting some balance and structure back into the soil. That just takes time. I suppose being patient was a challenge to overcome.
Yep. Yeah.
You sort of think you're going to transition things very quickly. We wanted to plant a lot of trees and get some protection on the farm. The farm was very exposed. In fact, we entered the Balanced Farm Environment Awards a year after we'd bought the farm, and one of the judges said to us that we were quite foolhardy to consider organics on our farm, given the nature of it. So, that just added fuel to the fire, really. We thought, we can prove that that's not the case. And went about planting a lot of trees. That was paramount. That was critical for the conversion process, to get some shelter shade. And, the trees, they need to tick about 9 or 10 different boxes in terms of providing fodder, shelter, shade, firewood, habitat, range of benefits from that fodder, like flax with the tannins, your poplar and willow for nutrient, poplar being high in zinc. All those aspects were taken into consideration, and so that was part of the challenge in the early days, was just changing that environment.
Organic farming is basically no fertilisers, etc., on the soil or on the crops at all, is it?
No, that's totally incorrect, Brian. That couldn't be further from the truth.
Okay, that's what I want to know.
Yeah, possibly back in the day, that maybe why that's why organics got a bad rap, because our options around fertilisers and other inputs were pretty limited. So yeah, that's definitely not the case. We've got no end of options in terms of soil inputs nowadays. Solid, liquid fert. Yeah, we get a blend. Our solid fert comes out of Roriston, so our soils consultant works in with Roriston here in Aria. To start with, they were lime based, but now they're sort of more of a mineral based mix. But no, look, we can use anything. We can use potassium, we can use sulfur, we can use RPR. We can't use potassic super, your phosphates, your super, and obviously nitrogen-based fertilisers, urea, DAP, MAP, we can't use those. But, there are other fish meals and seaweed products and that sort of thing, which if we're looking for some nitrogen, will give us a degree of response, but certainly nothing like urea does.
Yeah.
But we just farm accordingly, manage that way.
So what you've done is you've dispelled the myth. I mean, because I think to the uneducated like me, organics to me meant, you don't put any of this stuff on the soil, you don't do anything here, it's all just natural. That isn't the case, is it?
No, not at all. No, we've, like I say, there's no end of options. It does tend to be a little bit more expensive.
Yep.
But that's probably only in the earlier years. Our maintenance now is realistic, probably comparable to a conventional farm. It's just fine tuning those aspects of mineral balancing. With the ash soils, they're notoriously low in cobalt, selenium, that sort of thing. So we've got all those things under control now, just with maintenance. So we can make excellent progress. And the thing is, Brian, with organic, you're always focused on an overall better outcome. You're not thinking, right, I need to grow some grass now, I'll slap some urea on. And as we know now, there are potential costs to the environment, other aspects of that sort of policy. So, we used to use nitrogen when we were share milking, and if it's done in a responsible manner, I'm not anti it at all, but we just need to look at more of a longer term style farming system, and probably like the old days, I suppose, where you like to have a half a barn full of hay at the end of the spring.
Sure.
Just as backup policy.
Sure. And I think the other thing too is that it is something that, again, it's organic farming is good for the environment. We know that. But over the last 3 seasons, it's been a bit challenging, hasn't it, with the dry weather, and being more, organic has probably made that a bit more difficult, perhaps?
Without a doubt, yes. Yeah, we don't have the tools in the toolbox. We don't have the options. It's, we're a bit more insular in that regard. And, part of the problem right the way through certainly the time we've been organic, is there's probably not enough of us. There's not enough support units. There's not enough grazing options, opportunities to source feed. Organic certified feed are pretty slim. So, when the last 2, probably 3 summers, it's been challenging in that regard. Just everything has to shut down. You got to dry off early, so that can impact your bottom line.
I was just about going to ask that question. Because of that, and because of these the drought or the summer seasons, have you had to dry stock off early? And you've pretty much answered that by saying yes. How much earlier has it been that you've needed to dry them off?
We're lightly stocked anyway compared to conventional system. We're 2 cows per hectare. Right. Most of the farms in the area are probably closer to 3. So we try and manage it that way, and trying to retain a buffer, and longer rotations, that sort of thing. But we were dry the middle of March this year. This has been our worst season ever on the farm. So it certainly had an impact. I think we got a bit of hill country as well, and the hills just haven't recovered. With 2 droughts in a row, it really knocks the hill country around, particularly in north facing slopes. So it does have an impact.
Yeah, I think this is something that people don't really understand. I mean, you've had to dry off probably around March. And it's a long time between checks, isn't it?
Oh, it certainly is. Our next payday is September, so that's a huge impact financially.
Yep. So the question is, what do you do in the meantime? I want to come and talk about the milk and that a bit, in a couple of minutes or so. But how do you sustain that longer period? I guess there's plenty of other work to do. But how do you diversify? How do you get around that?
Well, that's a good question. We have actually diversified into tourism. But unfortunately, with COVID, that wasn't such a wise move either. Well, it seemed like a good move at the time, but we purchased an old church here in Pew Pew and converted it into Airbnb accommodation. So it was going really well prior to COVID. Yeah, once we went into lockdown, the phone, it was the cancellation, one cancellation after the other. So So we thought that would be, longer term, it's certainly going to be beneficial. Yeah. But, no, look, the guy working for us is growing garlic. He's got a garlic crop for certified organic. So, that's a reasonably high value crop with, relatively low input. So, when you've got certified land, you see guys around the country, making a living off a couple of hectares. So that's, we're something we will give consideration to for a bit of diversity.
Right now, that's an interesting point. You mentioned, the B&B. We need to get Kiwis out and about, don't we? We need to get people looking at our own country. Now, what a great opportunity. You've got a B&B there, and it is just got to be the perfect little spot for somebody to come for a weekend or school holidays or something like that. So, here's your plug. How can they get in touch with you regarding that, Nick? Give you a call?
Okay, so, we've got a website. That's stmaryschurch.co.nz. They can jump on there. That's probably the best way to book at the moment. It saves going through the Airbnb.
Yep.
And there'll be phone numbers on that website so they can contact us directly. Yeah, so that's probably the best way to find us.
Right, so that's stmaryschurch.co.nz. Jump on the website, have a look at it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it very shortly. Jump on the website, have a look at it, and look, hey, there's no better opportunity in my book than now to start looking at our country and looking at the people that make our country so great, and you can't beat the land. Now, the next question is the garlic. You mentioned that one of your guys has got the garlic there. Now, that's certified, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. Yep. So, obviously a lot of interest in garlic, since COVID, people trying to boost their own immune systems and stay healthy. So, we see that as it's a lucrative crop.
Yeah.
And of course, the trouble with a lot of people are put off by the imported garlic. Doesn't have the flavour. It's been treated so it doesn't sprout. So, the good New Zealand, particularly certified organic garlic is, it's a good option for us.
Now, coming to even with the garlic, do you send it? If somebody says, "Look, I want a kilo of garlic" or whatever, have you got an outlet there that people can again pick up some garlic, good garlic?
Yes, quite possibly. We're sort of in that stage where we're building.
Yep.
Obviously, you need to retain a lot of the good garlic for seed stock from one year to the next. So we are in a building phase. But Max, he's been selling it through a local butcher up in Te Awamutu. It's a gourmet type butcher shop. So hopefully we're at the stage where we can get it into some online sales in the near future.
Absolutely, and that's what it's all about. It is the diversity, and it's the little things that you've done and are doing, like the B&B really impresses me. I'm going to go jump on that website in a minute or so and have a look at it because, it's right in the heart of our country, right in the heart of the King Country. It's right there. Now, I know that, with the stock and so forth, okay. Tell me about the milk. What's the difference between the organic milk process, or how does it shape up in terms of being better for you?
Well, we've been breeding for A2 protein for some time. There's there's obvious benefits to a lot of people with the A2 milk. So we're pushing for that. But the organic milk, the milk co-op we're supplying at the moment, they've run some tests for their customers, and the nutritional aspect of the milk and with the good omega oils stacks up very well on their testing. So it's grass fed, predominantly grass fed, we're feeding diverse crop. It's paramount that we get diversity into our pasture. We see that as that adds resilience. For dry summers in particular. All the tree plantings. They all add diversity as well. It's important that the cows have something to browse on.
Sure.
We're cutting fodder for our young stock through right through the drought. We were cutting fodder for them. They get a trailer load of fodder every day, so that's hugely beneficial for the health of the animal.
Sure, yeah,
and consequently the milk they produce. Yeah, big focus on that. Your soil biology and your plant diversity are the two key focuses for a healthy organic system. Yeah, and fortunately we've got the tools and the knowledge nowadays, to maximise that. For example, our soils consultant, he's working closely with a lab in Gisborne that does microbial testing on the soil. So they can actually pinpoint, the specific microbes that are in our soil and potentially look at areas that we can improve on. So, in terms of helping to release nutrient in the soil, our soils are very high in phosphate, very phosphate retentive, as you know, with the ash soils.
Yes, yeah.
There's something like 2.5 tonne of phosphate per hectare sitting in our soils that's been locked up over the years. That's something that, we still put phosphate on, don't get me wrong, but that's something, that's an avenue that we need to explore more, because the phosphate reserves in the world, and we're probably halfway through them.
Yes.
So we've probably reached that point where we're halfway, and they're not going to last forever. So, we really need to look at other ways of utilising the nutrient in our soils, and that comes about by, strong microbial activity and plant diversity.
The thing here is that are more and more farmers picking up and following your lead in the respect of saying, let's try the organic farming?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly, the big push at the moment with the regenerative agriculture.
Yep.
That's probably a lead-in to organics. I mean, we've been focusing on, that regenerative farming been part of organics the whole time we've been on the farm.
Sure.
But yeah, I think that's a lead-in. I think organics probably scares people to a degree in regards to the restrictions around what you can and can't do. And for us, our biggest nightmare is controlling blackberry.
Uh-huh.
So that is a in this area and your area as well, that it certainly is an issue. So yeah, that's a little bit scary. We've actually taken some land out of certification this autumn because we simply could not control the blackberry. It was too difficult to.
Right.
Blackberries growing around rocks on steep faces and what have you. So we've just taken it out, and we're going to run some conventional beef on those areas, and to make life easier and hopefully more productively.
Tell me, what does Jo do? Is she right in there with you, helping you all the way through?
Oh yeah, most certainly. Yeah, yep. No, it's been. But yeah, recent times she's been more involved with the Airbnb. It sort of fits in quite well with farming. Yeah, she's got a bit of time during the day to do both. So, and then it's quieter through the winter when she's busy rearing calves.
Yep. Yeah.
So it does tie in quite well. It's more of a summer thing.
Yeah. Now, okay, how can people find you? Whereabouts is the church? Is it in Pew Pew or is it out on the property?
It's in Pew Pew, so it's only at 2 k's from the farm.
Right. Yep.
So yeah, it's number 12 Keir Street. So it's right in town.
Right in town. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and of course we've got a good, well-known cafe here and bar and restaurant in town. So, and there's attractions in this area. We've got the Hobbiton up the Mungataki Valley. There's walks, there's bike rides. It's a great little stop-off if you're passing through.
Oh, so, I remember when I went to school in New Plymouth, and one of the big stops was Pew Pew. We'd always stop there,
yep.
and
yep.
It, in those days it was probably a bit of a more thriving town than it is now. But what impresses me is the diversity that you've got with the Airbnb. You've got the garlic there. The stock's dry at the moment, but the other things that you're doing, to me, really stack up as saying, hey, you guys have really nailed this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's, the organics, there's no doubt about it. The time we've been involved with it, it's just the awareness around, healthy food and caring for the environment has grown exponentially. So there's plenty of potential for diversity, and we're all we've all got a bit of interest and a bit of knowledge in growing those higher value crops. So we're fortunate to have very good soil, very good ash soil. So there's opportunity there that we'll consider. One thing we're looking at is, and it is a restriction to us, is not having our own support unit. So that's what we're looking at as part of the business at the moment, is to transition a support unit that we can run our own young stock on, and hopefully provide the dairy unit with a bit of supplementary feed. That'll certainly help with be a little bit more insulated from the vagaries of the season. But unfortunately, it does take 3 years to transition to the organic program, so there's a bit of a time lag there before we get some benefit. But that'll strengthen the business no end if we can find something close to us to support the dairy unit.
Absolutely, and I think the good thing is that there's a market for it, and there always will be a market for it. The A2, as you say, it's there, and you might pay an extra $1 or $2 for the milk, but at the end of the day, it's much better for you, isn't it?
Oh, it certainly is, and it's about, we always see ourselves as internalising the cost structure of our product. We're always, right since we bought the farm, we've been conscious of the quality of the water leaving it. So, it's it's just it's a moral thing. We like to, probably doesn't help our bank balance over the years, but it'll pay off in the long run, and that's just it's what we believe in. So
yeah, and I think that's the difference, and I think you've nailed it there. It's the belief, isn't it, rather than the profit, if you like. It's the belief in what you're doing, because at the end of the day, we're leaving a legacy for our grandkids and their kids, etc. And I think we can put hand on heart and say, well, we've done our bit.
Exactly. That's right. Yep. And, I think we're involved with the King Country River Care group here. That's,
right, yep.
Obviously got the funding recently. So, that I'm really excited about that group and the progress we can make within this catchment and getting other farmers on board. It's, I'm excited about having a partner to play there and get alongside that group and support them.
And I know, the other thing is that with this COVID-19 business, I think everybody is having a pretty good look at where they're going and what they're doing. And in my opinion, I think a lot of people are going to be moving out of the cities. They've realised, I think, that there is a bigger country than just the major cities. People are already looking around, and I think that we're going to see an upsurge in people moving away from the cities. That's my view. It's going to be towns like Piu, Tomaranui, Tigawiti, etc., the smaller communities that are going to, there's going to be a resurgence, isn't there?
Yep, you're quite right. And, the opportunity for people to work from home.
Yep.
And meanwhile, enjoying, living in these smaller rural communities and enjoying the benefits of those communities. And, it'll be a win-win scenario. They'll bring investment, they'll bring some knowledge and support to the community. So, there's a positive spin-off.
Absolutely, I agree. Hey, Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. You've taught me so much. I've learned a few things, quite a lot actually. And as I say, I'm going to go and look up stmaryschurch.co.nz, look at the B&B, and nothing like a weekend away, is there, out of your comfort zone?
Most definitely. No, it's a very comfortable space, and like I say, there's things to do here. Or it's there's plenty of room just to kick back and relax in a beautifully restored historic building. So
that's the one.
Good one. Thank you, Brian.
You're listening to the King Country Rural Roundabout in association with the Ruapehu Rural Support Trust. Phone 0800 787 254 on the Trunk 88 FM, homegrown right here in Tomaranui.
And it's my pleasure now to say a very, very warm welcome to Geoff Burton, who is a farm consultant and a sheep farmer based here in Tomaranui. Welcome aboard, Geoff.
Oh, thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It is a pleasure, and I know that over the years people move away and come back and do all these sorts of things, as we were saying off air a minute or so ago. Tell us how it's developed for you. How have you sort of come through the years? Because I know you farmed down the river, didn't you?
Yeah, my mum and dad had a property down the Curacao, down the Wanganui River there, and it was pretty rough when we grew up as kids. You know, it was all horseback and a few wild cattle, quite a few wild pigs, and it was in the sticks, but I realise now that it was actually a very, very good way to grow up. We learnt to work hard, and it put us in pretty good stead for where we went. My mum in particular encouraged us to, you know, get a good education. We had to go to boarding school like all the kids from there in those days.
Yeah.
Managed to stay long enough to get UE because I was not a good student. And then went to Massey and did a BAg Sci, which I also managed to stay long enough to get. And in between a year or two's shearing and crutching and picking spuds and so forth, I managed to get a job with the Rural Bank for about 6 years, which was the government lending institute, rural lending institution in those days.
Yeah.
This was in the mid-70s and mid-80s.
Yep.
Fantastic experience, you know, because it taught you that business management, you know, and business planning is the number one in any business. There's all sorts of other things you can do. And I'd say today it's also the same, perhaps along with feeding of your livestock for farming.
Right.
So, and then in 1983, my wife and I were foolish enough to leave the Rural Bank, a lovely, in those days, job for life with the government.
Yep.
And take the risk of starting up our own business here in Tamarunui, which has gone extremely well to the present. My aim, of course, was always to own a hill country farm.
Right.
And ironically enough, you know, we built up our equity pretty slowly, which was very difficult through the 80s because interest rates went crazy. But when we were strangely enough in a position to do it, which had been my lifelong ambition, which was probably about 30 years ago, I was no longer prepared to go, you know, back to square one and battle away, carting totes posts up a King Country hill. So we carried on with the business and bought shares instead, and it's probably the best thing we ever did.
Right.
But we're lucky enough too that we bought 100 acres on the edge of the Wanganui River when we first came back, and that's probably what's kept me sane through all these years and kept my hand in farming, and still does today.
I couldn't think of a better place to buy a property along the Wanganui River. I mean, beautiful in its own right, and it must be satisfying looking out and you know, being on the property and saying, it's mine.
Well, of course, we're only kaitiaki or guardians. No one can ever own land.
Yes.
I often look at a big rock that's down in the river below our place. I wonder how many millions of years it's been there. And for anyone, whatever your race or colour, to assume that you own land or a river or a rock is just nonsensical.
Absolutely.
So we're lucky to have been guardians, and it's been wonderful for me, especially in the earlier years, to be, you know, farming 500 odd sheep and 50 odd cattle, enough to call yourself a farmer and to actually have to make the decisions that you're advising your clients on, business decisions, and in particular feeding decisions, you know.
Right, and as a farm consultant, you must be seeing more and more of that coming into line today?
I think the major thing I would see today is that it's more necessary than ever to keep a focus on the basics of running a good farm business.
Yep.
And of course that includes keeping your sanity and your stress levels at a manageable level. Sustainability is a wonderful, wonderful word that can't be argued with, and I think it's got very easy in recent times to take a focus off the basics of good farming, and there's only about 3 or 4 of them.
Right.
So, yeah, always been important, but perhaps more important than ever now.
When you mention that, we talk about resilience and you know, creating a system that is going to take you into the future rather than try and do it hand to mouth. Would I be right?
Well, I'd say a system which is sustainable.
Yep.
That covers everything. In other words, and in the Tamarunui Sustainable Land Management Group, which I'm a member of, we've defined sustainability as being able to continue doing what you're doing forever without detriment to the land, to the people on the land, and to the people around the land. And, you know, that covers a hang of a lot of things, but sustainability is the major thing, I think. There are different stages of sustainability in terms of our group's emblem is the 3-legged milking stool.
Okay, yep.
And the seat is sustainable land management. And the legs are environmental, economic, and sort of social cultural.
Mm-hmm.
and the theory being that you need all three legs, and if you take one of them away, the whole thing falls over.
Yep.
Now, it's not a new concept, but it's a very true concept. But the question, once you've got your head around that concept, then becomes, okay, but which is the most important leg? Which one goes in the front?
Yes.
And we've come to the conclusion that, when you're young and you've got a big mortgage and, you're full of energy and so forth, of course, the financial one's in the front.
Right.
And then as you get along a bit, the environmental one sort of slips around. But ultimately, in the end, and when you talk about sustainability and my role as a farm consultant, ultimately, the most important thing in the end is the social, is that you're satisfied and your family is happy and you're satisfied with what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's pretty important. The others certainly have their place, but it's that satisfaction, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Absolutely. They say if you ask someone why 5 times, you find the real reason. For example, a farmer might ring me up and say, Geoff, can you come out and have a look at my system? And I'll say, are there any particular issues? They might say, and this has happened, I'd like to increase my lambing percentage. Well, if you ask them 5 times why they want to do that, you'll realise that they want more lambs and then they want more money. But ultimately, it's all designed to give them greater satisfaction.
I can't disagree with that one. And I think that applies across the board, to be honest with you.
It's nothing new.
It's nothing new. And I think you nail it in that respect, because it is about that satisfaction at the end of the day. And it's about, I think, isn't it, being able to sit back, look at it and go, I did that.
Yes. And as a consultant, I didn't, of course, have the training in the early days that they have today.
Right.
In terms of dealing with people and analysing what their main requirements are. But as a consultant, you realise that the number one thing you need to do, well, firstly, the number one thing is to try to read the people you're dealing with.
Right.
But in doing that, the main issue is to work out, before you start doing anything or saying anything, what are their goals and what are the important things to them? Which leg of the stool is in the front, or are they all the same?
Yep.
How do they want life to be, and what is their current system or way of doing things not achieving what they want life to give them? And then everything else makes it quite easy from there. Everything else that you talk about needs to fall into that,
and it all
meet
fits.
the goals.
It all fits together as part of that jigsaw, if you like. When you start drilling down, say, I come along and say, look, I want to do this or do that, and you start drilling down, you start unearthing a few things there that, okay, yep, you've got this wrong, or no, that you're on the right track, and then you need to boost it. Would I be right?
I don't think you tell people that they've got things wrong. I think the first thing you do is, and I just about always do this, let's sit down have a cup of coffee and tell me the 3 or 4 things you really want out of the next 20 years.
Yep.
The big things. Financial security, reduce debt, educate the kids, keep healthy. What are the big things? And then as you go around the track and around the farm and as you're talking later in the day, it's not a matter of saying people are wrong. It's a matter of saying, well, do you really think this is going to fit in with what you say your goals are? Yeah. And it's very, very useful, and it makes people think. You shouldn't stuff around, of course. You shouldn't, beat around the bush. You need to say, well, you said these are your goals. Is this really going to get you where you want to go, where you say you want to go? Very constructive and very useful.
Right. So once again, it comes down to that point. And I mean, a lot of people, I know when we talk about goal setting, people go, yep, there's my goal. But I think they forget, and I remember, some years ago, always use stepping goals. You can jump across the river, boulder to boulder, but if you sort of place the little rocks in the river, it's going to be a lot easier getting to the other side. And I think that's, fairly prevalent, isn't it, with whatever we do. Have the big goal at the end of the day, but work towards it with little goals, stepping goals. And I think that's what I'm hearing coming through.
Well, absolutely. The number one thing is to be reasonably clear that these are the goals, and they're often, the personal ones are more important than any others. The second thing is, to have a plan without getting too academic, to make the goals occur. And I usually encourage people to put their lives into sort of 5-year bands. So you might say, right, well, let's not try to do everything. For the next 5 years, educate the kids. Don't try to pay off any loan, and then in 5 or 10 years, make that the period where you're going to get stuck into your principal repayments. Because we do tend to try to do everything at once.
Yeah. Yep.
But the other big thing, I think, and it's got more pronounced in the last 20 years, is there's so much that we can do these days. And I'm talking about sheep, cattle, deer systems. There's so much we can do on our farms. There's so many options and policies and technologies The difficulty that never used to be there 30 years ago.
Right.
So the trick today is to say, well, okay, these are our objectives. Let's get the main things in place. Let's get the big things right, and we'll let the little things, come in later if they are worthwhile. And it's very easy to let systems get very complex. So you've got a lot of paddocks, a lot of mob, and when things are going really well and you're not and you're able to do it, you could probably make more money doing that. But over a 5-10 year period, especially as you get a little bit older, and I don't mean really old, I just mean aged, sometimes it's better to not try to push everything quite so hard.
Sure. Yeah.
The other thing is one of the major issues, major requirements of a good system is flexibility. And flexibility in our type systems, in my opinion, usually means not being overstocked in your summers or your winters, and having policies, so that you're, like, for example, in the last few years, you're lambing early enough that you've got a whole lot of lambs and a cull ewes gone before the dry period. So flexibility is very, very important, and along with that goes sort of plenty of fertiliser, of course, and a bit of nitrogen to make sure you've got plenty of feed.
Tell me something, what pressures are on farmers from government policy, social media, the whole raft of things? Because it to me, one of the things I've been hearing over the weeks is that there's a lot of pressures on there, but farmers being farmers tend to throw it into the back burner and forget about it. They forget about the mental health, their family's health, and all those sorts of things. Are they more prevalent today?
This is a major issue, and I think it's something we talk about and we need to be really aware of it, and that's increasing stress levels, particularly on younger farmers.
Right.
Hill country farming, particularly if it's a family farm, surprisingly enough, for those who might think, oh, that's great, you get out on the hills every day and there's the bush and the streams and the creek. In actual fact, it can be a very, very lonely job because you're not mixing very much with other people, and it's very easy to, especially when you're under financial pressure, it's very easy for the guy to go out and bury his head in the sand and do the fencing and shift the stock and do all the physical stuff that needs doing and turn a blind eye, if you like, to what's happening. Also, of course, you're pretty tired when you come at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
So the last thing you want to do is to be handling emails and sitting on a computer, let alone doing budget. So it can be a very lonely job, and and you can get into the trap. You could fall down into the pit progressively, and you will be aware, I'm sure, that there's been recent, suicide in this area.
Yep, for
and
sure.
in others.
Yep.
So in terms of the stresses on farms at the moment, I actually sent a newsletter out to my clients in about February, I think it was, or March, it might have been during the lockdown, just talking about the fact that farmers are probably experiencing more factors leading to stress at the moment than I think I've ever seen. The worst would be the drought.
I was about to mention that, yeah. That has it must have had and has an adverse effect, and it affects everybody in different ways. This is the part about it, isn't it?
Well, when you can't, the biggest worry for most farmers is they're not going to be able to feed their stock well.
Sure, yep.
And that's a really stressful thing when you know your stock aren't getting fed well and you don't know how long it's going to go. So the major factor was probably the drought, which is coming to an end for most of us, but it will have ongoing effects. And for some people around New Zealand, of course, they're still, they're not in drought now because they've had rain, but the effects of the drought are still very, very major.
Yep.
The second probably most stressful issue would have been the government policies. The zero carbon bill, looking at taxing our animals, the freshwater requirements, and of course now the biodiversity, which hasn't been the biodiversity requirements, which haven't been settled yet.
Correct.
So that all created a lot of uncertainty for farmers. Are we going to have to unreasonably fence our creeks and so forth? That looks like that's been resolved reasonably sensibly. Are we going to have to pay a tax, on our livestock emissions? Are we going to be able to claim a credit for all the trees that are growing on our property? And of course the biodiversity now, I don't know how much you know about that, but the proposal as it's been put up is that, a significant natural area can be declared just about on any part of your farm that's already a significant natural area, but might become a significant natural area.
See, I don't know.
These are all very worrying things. And then on top of that, of course, we had COVID-19 and the lockdown. And
I've heard a couple of people talk about the biodiversity. I don't know very much about it at all. And obviously it's a subject we could talk on for a long time. I think you're summing it up really well. Now, I didn't know you could do this, declare an area, for example.
Well, that's the proposal that's come out. You see, we've got the climate change, which is animal emissions, the Climate Control Act, and we've got the freshwater requirements. Now, the climate one is just coming out at the moment. Government's coming out with their sort of more firm proposals, and the freshwater one, they've come out basically a few weeks ago with their proposals. The biodiversity one, we haven't heard from them yet, but they've put up these rather unrealistic proposals for so-called consultation. At least there actually was a little bit more consultation for the biodiversity as opposed to the others. But the point I'm making is that it's all very stressful for farmers, wondering what's going to happen. And,
of course.
Pretty much all the farmers I know, including ourselves, have put a lot of time and personal disposable money into looking after the environment, and making it better. We love our creeks and our streams.
Absolutely.
And our bush,
Yep, of course.
And so it's pretty sort of unsettling to think, this government's just going to come and ignore what we've been doing, and treat us pretty roughly.
Is it really a case of, finding a job for some bureaucrat and is it over the top?
No, the stupid thing about it, it's a bit like the taupo was seen years ago.
Yeah.
Everyone actually wants the same result. We all want clean water. We want to protect our bush, and we want to protect our native flora and fauna. We've all got the same basic desires, but some politicians and policy makers don't have enough basic understanding and practical experience to say, look, this is practical, this isn't, let's do it over such and such a period. They sort of come in with all guns blazing. And that approach has made it very, very stressful for farmers.
I go back to the day of Jim Bolger. I remember when I used to interview Jim on a Monday morning. And I'll tell you what, the guy knew what he was talking about because he was a farmer. He knew the farm. He farmed the King Country. He knew it. Yes, he may have had a pretty good property there. But, and I think what you're saying is right, that we don't have that degree of perhaps dedication and knowledge that some of these people that have given these positions, I don't know.
I've always made an effort to get central government policy makers together with farmers wherever I could. I used to take an annual farmers trip down to Wellington to see the highest decision makers. So we often saw the minister and other ministers, but more importantly, we went to see the policy makers in the Ministry of Ag, which then became MPI. And the Ministry for the Environment, and 9 times out of 10 they would always say to us, how can we do more of this? It was such a useful meeting, talking with 20 farmers from the King Country, who weren't politically sort of motivated at those meetings. And I always used to say to them, just give me a ring and I can pull up a group any time you like. But it virtually never happened, including with ag research quite recently. Say, this is great, but they actually haven't got the ability or desire to actually meet with the farmers. But it's at the policy-making level where we can have the greatest effect. And our Sustainable Land Management Group today, wherever we can, we try to get people from the policy divisions up from Wellington. But what's happened, I've found in the last 20, 30 years, is that I think the policymakers have lost their core of experienced people who are coming from a farming background, who, the older experienced core, they've lost that. And you've now got a lot of young people.
Right.
And they seem to change their jobs very often.
Right, yes.
So you're not dealing with people who have, it's a bit the same with some of the councils, you're not dealing with people who really know what they're talking about. They've been there long enough,
I remember going back a year or 20 or whatever it was, and there was a bloke that used to be in Tamarua. His name was Murray Officer, and I think he was with MAF. He seemed to have it right. He knew the farmers. He worked with the farmers. They liked him, as I understand, and they had a good rapport. And as you say, I think that's gone today. The ones that are in there, they may only be in a job. They may be on a short-term contract, in and out and gone. They've moved on somewhere else, and so nothing really follows through, does it?
To be fair, though, to this government, they did a lot of things, especially in the first year they were in.
Yep.
And I've got quite a bit of time for Damien O'Connor.
Yep.
To be fair, they did outline some proposals and really did start talking to the farmers. Now, some of them might have been a bit rough, but they did make the effort, and they have actually talked at a farmer level, perhaps more than any other government has done.
Okay.
And I'm hoping that when all these proposals eventually come out, like the freshwater one, that they will actually have a lot of common sense around them.
That's a good thing. I mean, it's got to be a good thing. And I know I've had a couple of conversations around this freshwater one, and a few people have said, it is a good thing, but it's got to be followed through and it's got to be done properly. And I don't think that that's a bad thing either. How do you sort of look at taking pressure off, or how does a farmer look at taking pressure off? What can they do to simplify the farming system, for example, that they've got? What can they do to make it easy for themselves?
Okay, very good question. I think in essence, they need to focus on the basics.
Right.
I'm particularly talking about the younger farmers here.
Yep, sure.
Focus on the basics, and there's only about 4 of them. The main one, I think, is financial management. So do a budget, have realistic goals with it and stick to it. If you've got a plan, it doesn't matter if it goes a little bit awry. If you've got a plan, you won't get so stressed if it goes a little bit awry because you've got a plan and you can't do any more than have a plan.
Yep.
It's when you haven't got a plan.
That's when you've got a problem.
That's when you get stressed because you're not sure what's happening and you've got a bit of debt. If you haven't got any debt, it doesn't make much difference. I think along with financial planning goes, personal planning.
Yep.
And for me, it's just a one-page foolscap that says these are our objectives, these are our personal goals, and here's what we're going to do over the next 5 years, and the next 5, and the next 5. So that's pretty basic. The second major requirement of simple farming is to feed your stock well all the time. So number 1 is don't have too many, but by the same token, have enough to make the farm do a little bit of work, especially in the spring.
Sure.
So don't have too much stock. Put plenty of fertiliser on and almost definitely some nitrogen. A lot of farmers still don't use nearly the amount of nitrogen they should be.
Right.
So you've got your financials, your feeding, have flexibility in your system, and that comes down to stocking rate and not overstocking your summer or your winter.
Right. Yep.
And the last thing, it also starts with F, is I say have fun doing it. Try to enjoy it as much as you can along the way. So involve the kids and the family and what you're doing. Don't try to do everything at once and, enjoy the journey.
I think that's a very important point. Have fun doing it because if there's no fun in it, you might as well get out now.
Of course, it's easy to say at my stage. I mean, my wife will say to me, for the first 10 years, you shore all your own sheep, and I came down to Rowsley and you were away with clients and you hardly ever saw the kids. So. And we nearly went bust in the mid-'80s when interest rates went up 20%, over 20%. So it's very easy to be wise when you're a bit older, but it doesn't take away the wisdom of the.
I think you're right. I think it is easy to look back in hindsight and say, well, yeah, but you know what? During that time, I bet you had some of the best times you've ever had.
Yeah, well, I had a team, and the best dogs I've had doesn't mean to say they were particularly good dogs, although I was very good with them. But yeah, no, my older brother and I went down the south with my twin brother and did an autumn muster down there on Glenfalloch and Lake Huron. That was fantastic, and I had a reasonable team of dogs then. Yeah,
I agree. There's an element of there's an element of risk there, but at the same time, we've all got to be a little bit of a risk taker. We've got to believe in ourselves to be able to move forward and do the things that we want to do. And what I'm hearing is, these are the good things. These are the good things.
Well, my advice to people in farming and also investing, because we do quite a lot of investing, is the approach that I've found is the best one, and it's come out so strongly in the last 12 months with what's happened to the share market and economies and COVID-19. My advice to people is be slightly conservative, but if an opportunity comes along, do your sums and jump right into it.
Yeah, I reckon that's a good point. Jump right into it. Do your sums, jump into it. Take that risk.
I've had a reputation of being, people tell me, oh, you're conservative. Well, if they knew the risks I've taken in my life, they wouldn't say that. But I believe in, you're slightly conservative. So when you're budgeting, and you don't go the 100%, you just come back a little bit from that. But if something comes up like, I've learned this buying property, if something comes up, you think, oh boy, I better have a look at that. Do your sums, go into it and grab it. Because 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a pretty good thing to have done a couple of years down the track.
I think that's it. It may not, look attractive today, but 2 years, 3 years down the track, well, that was the best decision I ever made. And I don't know how many times I've heard that from people, all sorts of things. It's taking that little bit of a risk, but remembering at the same time, I think that, you got to follow your process and you got to stick to it. You can't deviate from it. And I think that's when you start getting into trouble, isn't it?
I think so, but of course you have to review your position.
Yes.
But, your basic path and your basic goals usually don't change very much.
Yep.
And as long as you treat them, as I say, with slight conservatism, stick to that, but take a little bit of risk on other things, or more than a little bit of risk. One of the greatest business qualities I read, and this came from a Greek philosopher from many thousands of years ago, was persistence. One of the greatest financial factors leading to success was persistence. And, you could call it pig-headedness in my case. But, you do have to put your head down, your bum up sometimes, and just grind through the tough times. Just stick it out. As long as you're not going down a negative path and you're getting worse and worse, you just sometimes have to stick your head down and your bum up and just get on with it, because you pretty much always come through it. Things get better.
You're listening to the King Country Rural Roundabout in association with the Ruapehu Rural Support Trust. Phone 0800 787 254 on the Trunk 88 FM, homegrown right here in Taumarunui.
And it's my pleasure to welcome Geoff Hall to the show. Geoff's a beef and sheep farmer near Ohura. Now, one of the interesting things, Geoff, is that you've sort of took on a lease before you started owning the farm, didn't you? Tell us how that worked.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We started leasing 12 years ago now, well, back in 2008. We started with a 300-hectare lease. It was 50-50 for a start, just in the stock, which we paid off gradually over 3 years, and then went on to leasing the whole farm for another 3. Yeah, and then we took on, managed to pick up another lease next door, and just sort of gradually worked up and bought our first farm 3 years ago. Yeah.
Okay, and so you now own your farm. How many acres have you got there?
We still have one of the leases, which is 470 hectares.
Yep.
And we bought 250 hectares 4 years ago, and we just recently bought another 170 hectares, so we've got about 870 odd hectares all up.
Okay, now I've got to ask the question here. I know your wife Amy works at the Taumarunui Hospital, and you've got the kids as well. How did it all work? I mean, it must have been yeah, I know, I'm curious now.
So Amy worked full time up until we had the kids. Flynn's now 7 years old, but Amy's been working 2 days, between 2 and 3 days a week through. So yeah, the kids sort of just come around on the farm with me while she's at work, and it works out pretty well. It keeps us pretty busy, but
right.
We sort of just keep going really, and the kids enjoy the farm life. They get sick of it sometimes, but it's just things that have to happen. And
what was the decision-making process for you to say, righto, we're going to buy, we're not going to lease, we're going to buy our own property? Was there a fair amount involved in sorting that through?
I guess we didn't get it pushed on us, but we were ready by the time we ended up losing our lease 4 years ago that we started with.
Yeah.
They wanted to give another young couple a go at leasing, so it sort of pushed us into buying a farm, and it felt like it was a huge step at the time. We actually ended up buying the neighbours, a nice older lady and older man that we're quite happy to sell to a young couple. So it worked out really well at the time for us. So
in a sense, by losing that lease, you actually gained the property through that.
Oh, absolutely. We had been talking about it for 12 months as to whether it was the right time to buy, and we felt that it was getting close to the time to try and have a crack.
Right.
That's just made our decision easier, I guess.
So you bought the farm about 3 years ago, and since then, what, you've been developing it? Tell us what you've been doing on that since then.
For a start, we've just about completed a laneway through the property. It's quite a long, narrow property, and it took a bit to get stock through. You had to move sheep and things past them, so we've managed to get a laneway through the farm. We started a cropping system where we put in some Swedes and some kale, just for a new grassing policy in behind. Renewed the covered yards, and sort of just made things a little bit safer to work around up at the yards, and so just chipping away bits at a time, but it's coming together quite nicely. Another couple of years, hopefully, and we'll be getting close.
Right. What I'm hearing there is perhaps it was a little bit run down, was it?
Oh, yep. They were an older couple, sort of 78 and 83. So,
gosh.
I mean, they'd done enough, but they had developed it a lot in the early years, but it's probably just let it get run down a little bit, probably in the last 10 years or so. I mean, just coming in and having a fresh look at things, I guess, always helps too.
I guess that's the thing, isn't it? Fresh eyes, and it's always going to pop something up, and I'm sure it has. Now, you also do a bit of cropping on the farm, don't you, as a way of establishing new pasture, and you provide the feed for your cattle, etc. Over the winter.
Yep.
How's that going?
Really well. This year probably not quite so much. We actually ate all our winter feed in the summertime this year, right, and ended up putting in oats. So we've got some oats there for our cows for a little bit later on, just trying to push that out as late as we possibly can. That's working really well for us though. Just having our cows behind a tape on the crops while our ewes are out lambing, just gives the ewes a bit of extra feed while the grass is still a little bit short.
Yeah, I would imagine the drought's been a bit of a downside as well for you.
It has been this year. It's been a really tough year, but we started leasing in the 2008 drought, and we got hit with eczema then, and there was $45 lambs and $25 ewes. So we have been through the ringer before, so we sort of just pushed through it and coming out the other end, really.
I think the thing there is that it wasn't a new venture, was it? Because basically you were already farming there, you were in the area, and it was a transition, I guess, from leasing to owning, wasn't it?
It was the only way that we could. Yep. We managed to own our own stock, which was a huge asset for us when we moved on to owning the farm. We didn't have to go out and buy stock. Yeah, it made a big difference here.
How many head? What have you got? Sheep and beef mixed?
Yep, sheep and beef. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
And you've got a couple of good mobs, I would imagine there.
We've got 2,800 ewes and about 800 ewe lambs, and we were running 260 in-calf cows, but we've cut that down to 220 this year just because of the drought.
That's a fair size to get around.
Yeah, it's a fair size. Yeah, we've got about 500 odd weaner cattle on as well at the moment.
Yeah.
It keeps us busy.
I would imagine it would do too. Now, I understand you're also helping organise a bit of a fundraiser at the Matari school, and you're looking for farmers willing to raise a few lambs for the school over the winter. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we've been ringing around local farmers around the Matari area, just sort of trying to get people to take on 5 or 10 lambs, just as a bit of a fundraiser for the school. We go out and buy a few lambs on behalf of the school and get them shorn, and Totally Vets in Tamarunui donated us some Zolvix so that we could quarantine drench them, and just send them out and try and make a little bit of money come October for the school. Save it's not a very big school these days, so just trying to save a bit of work for the fundraising committee and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So by doing that, I mean, obviously it provides some dollars for the school, and it also provides, I guess, some Christmas fare for one or two people.
Yeah, hopefully brings the community together a little bit. We're hoping to have a bit of a potluck dinner towards the end of it, just for people that have donated that done that sort of stuff for us, and sort of get the community together a little bit and have a bit of a dinner and a bit of a chat a bit of a catch up with everyone.
There's something special, isn't there, about little communities like Matari and sort of Ohura, Piu Piu, places like that. There's a uniqueness there, I feel, that we don't see in a lot of other parts of the country. A very, very close-knit community, I would imagine.
Yeah, for sure. We're sort of far enough away that people don't really travel to each other to get groceries and things, So we've got the local school and the local cosmopolitan club, and that's about us. Everybody catches up and is pretty close to each other, really.
How long have you been in the area?
My dad farmed in Martree up until till I left high school about 23 years ago.
Yeah. Yep.
He sold up and he actually moved to Auckland to work on some parks up the Auckland Regional Parks up there.
Okay. Yeah.
And I sort of went dairy farming for a year and didn't enjoy that. I thought that was going to be my way to get into farming, into farm ownership, but I just didn't enjoy it. So I came back sheep and beef farming and managed to get a lease from somebody that was kind enough to offer it to us. So.
Yep.
We're pretty fortunate.
Would you recommend it as a pathway for people that are, for young families, etc., that are trying to get in and get a few acres of their own as a way of getting in the door, if you like?
Yeah, I think leasing's probably one of the best for sheep and beef farmers if they can pick up a lease. We did a lot of off farm jobs as well. We basically worked off farm to live and put everything back into just trying to pay the mortgage, really, just to buy a bit of dirt.
Yep.
But also even just from a young fella, that's sort of what I knew that I wanted to do, and saved pretty hard to be able to buy the stock to get a lease when the opportunity arose. So it's just it's quite hard to do these days with the banks sort of trying to throw money at you to buy vehicles and that sort of thing. But if you can manage to save a little bit of money, I think it just helps show the banks that you're willing to work real hard to do what you want to do.
I think that's the thing. It's the common sense thing there, isn't it? That you've got your goal in place, you've stepped it there. As Geoff Burton was saying earlier, it's a matter of prioritising what you want to do and then work towards it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to have the latest four-wheel drive or the latest tractor or whatever, does it? It means that you plan out, the way you're going to go over the next few years and say, well, okay, that's not on the plan for this year, maybe next year. And that would be a pretty sensible way to do it, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I mean, even when you don't, if you don't have a lease but that's what you want to do and that's what you're aiming for, it's, don't worry about going out and buying a flash ute to keep up with your mates and that sort of thing. It's, if you don't have the money, don't spend it really, until you've got, where you want to get to. It seems impossible at the time, but if you do manage to save enough, and the banks look at that favourably to try and get you over the line to get that lease in the end.
I mean, look, at the end of the day, the kids haven't suffered, Amy hasn't suffered, you haven't suffered. It's a lifestyle that's working for you, and it's working extremely well from what you're telling me. With the crops, you've got swedes, you've got oats, you've got kale there. And what other crops have you got there?
That's it at this stage. We do have a little bit of plantain, but we're probably going out of that in the future. We're just on the easy country, probably going a little bit more towards the bull fattening block instead of and a few less ewes. But yeah, sort of always willing to try different things. Yeah, we'd like to have a little bit of a go at fodder beat one day, and maybe even a bit of lucerne on some of the drier country. So yeah, I like trying different things.
Absolutely. It makes it a little more exciting, I would imagine.
It does. Yeah. It's not. Yeah, you get a little bit bored of it if you keep doing the same thing every year. So I'll try and mix it up a little bit.
I think the day of having to follow in the granddad's footsteps or whatever are pretty well in the past, aren't they? Because the new methods and the new innovations that come along, they're coming along rapidly all the time, and I guess it's probably hard to keep up with them too.
It can be. I'm not a very tech savvy type of person, but I do. Yeah, we've started EID in our ewe lambs and that. I've got a drafter with the EID system, and I'm hoping that that's going to really help our ewe flock in the future.
Okay, I know this is probably crystal ball gazing a little bit, but with this lockdown and everything that's going on, as a lot of people over the past few weeks have said, we're very much in a different world now because of this virus and so forth. Do you see it as a great future for the kids?
Yeah, I still do. I mean, people have still got to eat.
Yep. Exactly.
We've still got to feed the world.
Exactly.
I guess. So yeah, and as a lifestyle, it's pretty hard to beat.
I sort of recall my granddad many, many years ago saying it's the backbone of this country and it always will be, and I think that's pretty true, isn't it?
I think it's probably more so now than it ever has been too, just at the moment.
I think the other thing too, with the way that the King Country has developed and the way that technology's developed, we're not just isolated in the middle of nowhere anymore, are we?
No, we're just a stone's throw away from the rest of the world, really, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Mate, look, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I'd like to follow up at some point and see how things are moving along. You've got some good plans there, and you're implementing those bit by bit. That's a good thing, I reckon.
I appreciate you having me on there. Thank you.
That was the King Country Rural Roundabout, brought to you by the Ruapehu Rural Support Trust. Phone 0800 787 254. Be listening same time next week for another edition of the King Country Rural Roundabout in association with the Ruapehu Rural Support Trust. Phone 0800 787 254 on the Trunk 88 FM. Homegrown, right here in Taumarunui.